Almost every adult in America has bitten into this apple at least once in their life. Perfectly round, glossy red, without a single blemish, and tasting like a piece of damp cardboard with a hint of wax. We're talking about the Red Delicious, an apple whose shape has literally become the symbol of the word apple, in emoji, in logos, in kids' drawings. And here's the paradox. The world's most recognizable apple is also considered one of the worst tasting. But this isn't a quirk of nature. It's the result of nearly a century of deliberate decisions by an entire industry. An apple that was genuinely delicious at first was gradually turned into a product optimized purely for looks and shelf life. Today we're going to unpack how a Quaker farmer from Iowa, dozens of nameless mutation sports, and one chemical compound that literally stops biological time turned a beloved American fruit into something the manufacturers themselves, in an official patent filing, once described as tasting starchy and bland. The story doesn't begin in a lab. It begins on a small farm near Peru, Iowa, in the early 1870s. Quaker farmer Jesse Hyatt noticed a sapling growing in his yard that wasn't in the row where it was supposed to be. Hyatt was a man of order, so he cut the sapling down. It grew back. Hyatt cut it down a second time. The sapling grew back a third time, this time from living roots that had survived underground. According to legend, Hyatt finally gave up and told the tree, "If thee must grow, thee may," and left it alone. The tree grew for almost another decade before it bore its first fruit. When Hyatt finally tasted the apple, elongated, with striped red and gold skin and 5 distinctive bumps on the bottom, he was stunned. By his own account, it was the best apple he had ever tasted. He named the variety Hawkeye after his home state's nickname. For over 10 years, Hyatt carried apples to local fairs and tried to interest nurseries in them, but all he got in return was ridicule. The fruit's shape seemed too strange. In 1893, now 68 years old, he sent several apples to a new fruit contest run by Stark Brothers Nurseries in neighboring Missouri. The company's president, Clarence Stark, reportedly exclaimed after tasting it, "My, that's delicious!" But the note with the sender's name and address got lost among hundreds of entries, and the winner couldn't be tracked down. It wasn't until a year later, when Hyatt sent the apples again, this time in a barrel with a clearly labeled address, that the company finally found him. The rights to the tree were purchased that same year, 1894. Stark Brothers renamed the variety Stark Delicious and poured what was, for the time, an enormous amount of money into promoting it, including a display at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. The apple became a sensation. Here's the key thing to understand. Hyatt's original apple wasn't solid red at all. It had a yellow-green base with red stripes and a fairly modest blush. And according to people who later tasted apples from living descendants of that same tree, the flavor was rich and complex, nothing like the modern supermarket version. In 1914, the company acquired the rights to a different, yellow variety from West Virginia, which they named Golden Delicious. To avoid confusion, Hyatt's old variety was officially renamed Red Delicious, simply to distinguish it from its new golden relative. The apple became the most popular variety in the United States as early as the 1940s, and from 1968 all the way to 2018, it held an absolute record. No other apple was grown in America in such quantity. 50 years of market dominance, during which, as we're about to see, taste gradually stopped mattering. And this is where the real betrayal begins. In apple orchards, individual branches occasionally undergo spontaneous mutations, so-called sports. Suddenly, on the very same tree, a branch grows apples of a different color or shape. This is a natural phenomenon, and it's easy to lock in through simple grafting. For decades after the original tree's success, growers across the country hunted specifically for these Red Delicious mutations and selected them by exactly one criterion: how much darker and more evenly red the apple was, and how much earlier it achieved a market-ready look. In 1954, grower Walter Bloom patented another such sport, an apple identical to the previous variety, except that it turned red 10 days earlier. This continued for the next 30 years. Each new patented generation of Red Delicious became darker, more evenly colored, and ready-looking earlier, and not once was taste testing part of the selection criteria. According to researchers, at least 42 separate Red Delicious sports were officially patented in the U.S. And here's the truly telling part. In the 1977 patent application for one of these new varieties, the authors literally wrote that the goal of the new mutation was to correct the starchy and bland taste of some of the newer varieties, meaning the producers themselves, in an official legal document, admitted that the apple they were selling didn't taste good, and they tried to fix it with yet another cosmetic mutation, rather than by returning to the flavor of the original. As American apple historian Tom Burford liked to put it, the industry taught the consumer to eat with their eyes, not their mouth. But color is only half the story. The other half is about time. The modern apple you buy at the supermarket sometime in April could easily have been picked from the tree back in October of the previous year. This is possible thanks to controlled atmosphere storage technology. Apples are placed in airtight chambers where oxygen levels are sharply reduced and carbon dioxide levels raised, while the temperature is kept just above freezing. This slows the fruit's respiration and, with it, its aging. In 1996, researchers at North Carolina State University patented a compound called 1-methylcyclopropene, which blocks ethylene receptors, the natural hormone that triggers fruit ripening. Since 2002, the compound has been sold commercially under the name SmartFresh, and today it's used to treat a significant share of apples destined for long-term storage, including Red Delicious. Together, these two technologies literally stop the apple's biological clock for months, sometimes for nearly a year. The fruit stays firm-looking and doesn't rot, but the cellular structure of the flesh still slowly breaks down. The result is that same cardboard texture people so often complain about, specifically with Red Delicious: mealy, dry flesh that crumbles instead of crunching. An apple that spent 9 months in a storage chamber and then a few more weeks on a store shelf technically never rotted. But it hasn't been fresh in a very long time either. By the 1980s, Red Delicious made up roughly 3/4 of the entire apple harvest in Washington state, the country's leading apple-growing region. But that's exactly when consumers began switching en masse to other, tastier varieties: New Zealand's Gala, Japan's Fuji, Australia's Braeburn. The problem is that an apple orchard isn't a wheat field you can replant every year. A mature tree only reaches full fruit production several years after planting, and replacing existing plantings with a new variety costs a farmer, by industry estimates, up to $50,000 per acre. Thousands of Red Delicious growers found themselves effectively hostages of their own orchards. They physically couldn't quickly switch to what people actually wanted to buy. By 2000, overproduction and collapsing demand for Red Delicious had become so severe that the U.S. government approved the largest financial bailout in the apple industry's history up to that point: $138 million in compensation, or roughly $30,000 per farmer in Washington. It didn't save the variety, it only delayed the inevitable. The delay lasted almost 2 more decades. In 2018, the U.S. Apple Association officially confirmed Gala had overtaken Red Delicious in production volume for the first time in 50 years. The 50-year reign of America's most grown apple was over. The decline was accelerating. In 2003, Red Delicious still accounted for 37% of Washington's harvest. By 2021, its share had fallen to 15%. As of 2024, Red Delicious holds about 12% of the American apple market, while Gala holds nearly 17%. But the variety didn't disappear. It just moved. As of 2018, Red Delicious still accounted for roughly half of all U.S. apple exports. In Mexico and parts of Asia and Europe, the variety remains popular, partly precisely because the thick skin and shipping durability that flavor was once sacrificed for are perfectly suited to transporting apples thousands of kilometers. The apple America fell out of love with keeps growing for markets that, for now, still value its looks as much as America itself once did. This story isn't really about one bad apple. It's a story about how an entire food industry learned to optimize a product for the shopper's eyes rather than their taste buds. The waxed, glossy skin, the artificially halted ripening process, decades of breeding for color instead of flavor. All of it works only because, on the shelf, we choose an apple with our eyes in a matter of seconds, long before we ever get to taste it. The bitterest irony is that the very tree this all started from, the sapling Jesse Hyatt twice tried to cut down, actually produced delicious apples. The betrayal didn't happen at the moment of discovery. It happened over the following 100 years of breeding, as each successive generation was chosen for its looks rather than for the taste of what was inside. So the next time you come across a Red Delicious in a school lunch or at a hotel reception, Now you know why it tastes like cardboard, and that this decision was made long before you were born, back in the 20th century. If this story changed how you look at the apple shelf at the supermarket, hit like. It's the best way to help this channel reach more people. And let me know in the comments, which apple tastes best to you personally? I read every comment,